Hi everyone, and welcome to the Spotlight series at the National Cryptologic Museum. I'm Rob Simpson, the librarian.
And I'm Spencer Allenbaugh, the collections manager. So you've got some old books here, Rob. What do you have for us today?
Yes, we have some old books. In fact, this is the oldest book in our collection. This was printed in 1518. So, picture it. On a snowy night in the late 1400s, a young man is returning from college to his home. Or so the story goes. Anyway, the snow is so bad that he takes refuge in an abbey, and he ends up staying. He decides to stay. He joins the abbey, and within 2 years, when he's 21 years old, they make him the abbot. They make him in charge. They put him in charge of the entire abbey. That's how impressive, his personality and his intellect was. His name is Trithemius. The month of December in 2021 marks the 505th anniversary of his death, and so he was in that abbey. He built a huge library for the time. He was also a very prolific writer. He wrote his first book of prayers when he was 24 years old. And he was very interested in the occult and in cryptology and in a bunch of other things. But those are the ones that interest us because those are where these books come from. And so this first book was not printed until 1606, but he wrote it in 1500. So clearly, this is not a cover from 1606.
No, it is not.
But inside the book is the original book as published or as printed, in 1606. And the book is called Steganographia by Trithemius. And the book is controversial even to this day. So there's a dispute as to whether the book is an occult book with a little bit of cryptology underneath it, or a cryptology book with an overlay of the occult to kind of hide that. And so in it, he talks about being able to communicate over long distances. So there's some thought that that's talking about cryptology, but he's talking about communicating over long distances with angels and demons. So he made the mistake of showing this book to a visiting scholar.
Yeah, that's a mistake.
Yeah, who freaked out and spread the word that Trithemius was consorting with demons because that's the only way he could have gained the knowledge to write this book. So Trithemius set this book aside wisely. It was originally supposed to have 8 books in it. He finished 3 of them. But he never stopped being interested in cryptology. And so this book, which is called Polygraphia, which was published in 1518, about a year and a half after he died, is the oldest book in our collection, and it's considered the first printed book on cryptology. And we're fortunate enough to have 2 first editions from 1518.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so this one has been in our rare book room for many years. The other one was actually on exhibit at the museum, and it's now resting in our rare book room.
Okay.
And so I want to mention a couple of cool things about almost the materiality of the book itself. Because it was printed in 1518, I just want to show a couple of interesting things. The first one is, if you see this stuff sticking out here, this paper, this is common to see in a book from this era, and it's essentially a torn up manuscript, so a handwritten manuscript, that they stuffed inside the cover as backing. So this sits in between this piece of paper here and the actual board of the cover. That's very common. And then over the years, the wear and tear loosens it, and it gets released. The other thing is this beautiful 2-color printing, which is gorgeous.
Pops.
And it does. And then it's one of the things that's just fascinating about the early books from this era. Yeah. This book was printed, like I said, in 1518, and that red is still just as vivid as it was the day it was printed. In this book is a whole bunch of alphabets, essentially. And so we've talked in the past about code books, where you would take a word and replace it, with another word, another letter, a set of numbers. And that's essentially what most of this book consists of, is these alphabets. And so A would be replaced with this word. If you're using this alphabet, A would be replaced with this word. But the really important new idea that Trithemius put in here was a different way of getting at polyalphabetic substitution. So polyalphabetic substitution just means that the first time you encode the letter A, you encode it as one thing.
Yeah.
The second time you encode it as a different thing. And that defeats a statistical approach, or it defeats a simple statistical approach. There were previous ways of explaining or of getting at polyalphabetic substitution with a cipher disk. And so you would have a disk with the alphabet on the outside, and then a smaller disk with a different alphabet on the inside, and you could spin it and match up different letters.
Very familiar with those.
Yes, I'm sure you are. In Polygraphia, Trithemius created a table, and this table allowed for a much quicker and easier way of doing polyalphabetic substitution. So if you can picture, the top line of the table would be just A through Z. And then the bottom, the next line down, you'd have B through Z and then A at the end. And then the next line down, you'd have C through Z and then A and B at the end. So basically, you're matching up different letters with different letters. And so if you're, aardvark is one of my favorite words to use when I'm explaining this, because the first time you encode aardvark, you would use the first line. So A would equate to a B. The next time you do it, you go down to the next line, and the second A would equate to a C. And so you can't do a one-for-one substitution analysis of it. And so that's really the idea that's in this book that was, important. Beyond that, did you have any questions about?
Only that you said this was the first printed book on cryptography?
Sure. And you emphasize first, I would emphasize printed. And so, and they're both important, obviously. So we say that about this book, and scholars say that about this book. It's the first printed book, and some people even add the first printed book on cryptology in the West, which you don't need to because it has printed in it. And by that I mean the printing press was invented around 1450. And so there were earlier works, but they were in manuscript form. They were handwritten. And so the significance of this being printed is that you have many more copies available to you. And they're all exactly the same. And so it's easier to spread, and it has more influence that way.
Yeah.
In fact, you can go back to the 800s, and Al-Kindi, who was an Arab philosopher and thinker, was describing, statistical analysis of monoalphabetic substitutions as early as like I said, the 800s.
Codes has a pretty big history, huh?
Yeah, it really does. Well, that's about all we have this week. So thank you so much for joining us, everybody, and have a great day.